Welcome to the Mexpreneurs Podcast, the podcast about the stories of Mexican tech startup founders who are building world-class, fast-growing companies and having a positive impact at a large scale. My name is Sergio Chavez. I'm a Mexican based in Germany, a tech startup founder, executive, and mentor, and your host. Today we have Alan Ramos with us. Alan is the founder and CEO of Libre Foods, a BioTech startup from Barcelona, Spain, which is reinventing meat with fungi. Libre was founded in 2021, has raised over 3 million euros in venture capital, and launched the first fungi-based bacon in the European Union. Alan is Mexican-American, born in Laredo, Texas. After his bachelor in the US, he moved to Taiwan. He then worked and traveled during 3 years across 20 countries in Asia. During this time frame, he became vegan, which led him to move to Germany to work at the ProVeg Incubator, the world's first accelerator program for plant-based, fermentation-enabled, and cultured food startups. After 2 years and securing his initial investment, he moved to Spain to start Libre. I hope you enjoy. Support for this episode comes from Partnership Leaders, the leading community of partnership professionals and executives in SaaS and tech with over 1,500 members globally. If you're a tech startup founder, you know that partnerships are essential for the success of your business. PL is the place to connect with decision makers in strategic, tech, and channel partnerships at leading SaaS and tech companies like HubSpot, Salesforce, Google, and AWS. PL is also a thought leader, creating incredible content on how you can leverage partnerships to take your tech startup to the next level. I'm a member of PL and have seen firsthand the richness and value of this incredible community. Visit partnershipleaders.com to learn more and to apply to become a member. Make sure to mention in your application that Mexpreneurs referred you so that you can receive a special price if your application is accepted. Hello, Alan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sergio. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Alan. And Alan, please tell us, who is Alan Ramos?
I like to consider myself an environmentalist first, a plant-based advocate, and most recently a social entrepreneur. I grew up on the Mexico-US border to a Mexican family and kind of spent all my youth kind of growing up between two countries, two cultures, before I went to university in the United States at a small liberal arts school. I majored in decolonial philosophy with a focus on Latin America, almost a minor in Chinese studies, which led me to move to Taiwan after graduation. I was living in Asia for a few years before moving to Germany in about 2019, kickstarting my career in alternative proteins. And a little while after that, I got started on this beautifully hectic journey that's entrepreneurship.
That's quite a journey, Alan. If you wouldn't mind, digging a little bit deeper into those three things that you defined at the very beginning. So you mentioned yourself an environmentalist, social entrepreneur. I think I missed one.
Plant-based advocate.
Plant-based advocate. Could you dig down a little bit deeper into each of those three?
Sure. Even though I mentioned environmentalist first, I think that everything starts from the plant-based advocate piece. So about 10 years ago, I stopped eating meat. First, red meat, beef, chicken, pork. Was pescatarian for about a year. A year after, I went vegetarian, and then a couple of years after that, I went fully vegan. But the reason I say that is because I first started this diet change specifically under that same reason, for diet purposes. It was more of an experimental kind of nutritional piece that I wanted to take away meat products from my diet, kind of see how I felt. I ended up feeling really, really good, energized, and just very interested by this new way of eating that I started looking into this further, into what implications our food had on everything else, and was just blown away to really understand the link between our food choices and the environment, a lot of social justice issues as well. And once those bits of information kind of came into play, it was very difficult to kind of unknow these things, right? Or to unlearn these things. So I think from there is where a lot of the activism for environmentalism took off. And then now, most recently, why we kicked off this journey of entrepreneurship with a very social lens.
It's incredible how you connected all three of them. Thinking about, let's say, your North Star as Alan. So you mentioned from those three, which, as you mentioned, they've been sort of like in a sequence. but the primary one, if I understood correctly, is that plant-based advocate. So are you primarily right now at this point of time focused on creating consciousness, creating products, creating people to transition into that plant-based diet, into that plant-based consumption? Or how would you define your North Star in general?
For me, my North Star kind of took off a bit differently. So I think for me, the school that I came from was a lot of, it was never much business focused or innovation focused. I come from the humanities realm, and it was just like, once you're presented with this information, it's very difficult to kind of stay put without doing anything about it, right? So I think for me, it was a lot of how can we help as many people as we can, right? And I think that for me, now that I've been working in the entrepreneurship space for almost 3 years now, fully convinced, 100% convinced that entrepreneurship is the greatest tool to have large scale impact and change for people. I think for me, it's that North Star has always been, how can we help as many people as we can using a tool that a lot of us or many of us are very fortunate to be able to exercise every day, which is food. And once I learned about how much of an impact our food choices have on the environment, it made really, for me, it didn't make sense to focus on anything else that wasn't the environment with such a tangible tool, which is food. For those who are listening, anybody who doesn't know, our food, specifically industrial animal agriculture, contributes more greenhouse gases to the environment than the entire transportation sector combined. So think all of planes, trains, ships, cars, right? Everything worldwide doesn't impact as much as the animal agriculture sector does. I think that from an environmental standpoint, food is a major, major, major opportunity for solutions. While at the same time, on a social justice front, we do produce currently enough food to be able to feed our global population. Yet we do see massive amounts of hunger, of malnutrition, of deficiencies all across the globe. And a lot of that is because there's most of the food that gets grown is destined right now for livestock, right? To be able to fatten animals to then end up on people's plates. So I think from those two standpoints, that has been my greatest North Star, to dedicate my entire career to be able to create as much of an impact as possible with a massive problem on our hands that we don't talk about enough. And it seems often that people don't want to talk about something as emotional as food.
And how did you landed in the food industry? So you mentioned you changed your diet, you went vegetarian, but before you ended up specializing in the food industry, you were looking at other things where you could have that large scale impact that you were mentioning before? Or was it like you stumbled with the food industry and you started digging, you found it fascinating? Or like, how did that process happen that you ended up focusing on the food industry?
I think it's more of the latter. I mean, I think it's, as you mentioned, I mean, once you start digging in, you find out how big of a problem this is, right? It's like food is something that we do every single day. The more that you do something in an inefficient way, the more that compounds, right? So I think for me, it was a big part of, once I learned about this relationship between food and greater implications beyond just personal health, for me, it was very hard to unsee that. I think that that's how I got involved in the food industry, and then specifically on alternative proteins as well. And we can talk about this a little bit later, but I think also specifically from the entrepreneurship piece, I think for me, one of the most defining moments, I remember I was still in Asia during this time. I think I was already vegan or about to go vegan. And I remember there had some natural disaster had happened. And there was just a terrible response internationally. And it was just one of those hopeless feelings when something really terrible happens and it's just the focus is really in the bad place, that I was just super discouraged by what I was seeing and what was going on. And I had this thought. I remember I was going someplace and I was looking out the window and I just thought, I was like, we won't be able to get enough people to focus on doing good, unless we find a way to capitalize it, right? And it was like, at the time, it was such a sad thought, because I mean, maybe it's too idealist to think that people don't have to rely on some sort of capital incentive to do good. But at the time, it was very discouraging. But that mindset, I think, was the very first steps to really start putting the building blocks in place for how I would dedicate my entire career under this framework on how to combine what perceivably like the planet needs, right? How do you make whatever the planet needs into something that people want? Like working under that YC mantra of build something that people want, right? It's like, how do you bring these two concepts together? And I think that that's been a big part of the journey on how I ended up in food and how it's just like played such a defining mark on my career.
And talking about your journey, so you've been all over the world, from the US-Mexico border, Asia. How's been that journey? Because right now you're living in Spain. So what's been that journey like? So from where you were born to going abroad to Asia, going to Europe, like how did those things happen? Or how did those transitions happen? Or what took you from one place to the other?
I mean, I think it's funny, right? Because I think now when you look back at it, to me, it makes like perfect sense, right? How like one led to the other. But I think from like switch to switch or transition to transition, I think that it didn't make that much sense. But I think now it makes all the sense in the world that one thing led to the other and to another and to another. But yeah, I think that when I talk about this journey and where we are with Libre today, I don't mean to make this podcast go any longer, right? But I think I always start the journey in Asia, because had it not been that first time that I left kind of my environment, I don't think that I would have ended up building the company that I've built up until now with the focus that we have. There's a lot of really important lessons that had to be learned, a lot of interesting developments that go on. I think that the language learning that I was doing in university with Mandarin Chinese kind of led me to go to Taiwan. And that experience being in Asia, being very far away from my environment where I had been, the two cultures that I knew up until that point, I think that led me to just continue questioning, what is it that I wanted to focus my time on and career. That led me to alternative proteins and innovation. Entrepreneurship in Berlin. And that experience was very, very formative and super key to be able to lead me to where I am now, which is based in Barcelona, leading the company of my dreams with a team that I could not have asked for better people to be on this journey with.
So going from the US, because of your Mandarin skill set, going into Asia, and then, but how did that transition from Asia and to Berlin happen? You were applying for specific programs from Asia?
Yeah, this one's always a funny one, but I knew that I really wanted to get involved in the alternative protein space. At that point, I didn't know that it was called alternative proteins. I was more looking at it from an NGO standpoint. There's an organization really dear to my heart in Berlin called ProVeg International, whose mission is to reduce animal consumption by 50% by the year 2040. And I was just very moved by this mission, very, very selfless, very altruistic, specifically tackling, the environmental effects of diets, specific social justice as well, animal welfare. So it was a very multi-pronged perspective that drew me to this organization. I was very drawn to be able to work there. Initially thought that I wanted to be involved on the NGO side of things. Unfortunately, or very fortunately, at the time, there was only openings at a recently launched incubator that at the time was the world's first accelerator exclusively focused on alternative proteins. And I think that, when you're so determined to make something happen, you don't think very clearly, you don't think very logically. But I showed up at the beginning of 2019. I took a one-way flight to Berlin and showed up every day for 6 weeks straight to the incubator until I was able to land the job there. It was a little bit of an unconventional journey, but at the same time, once I started working there and once I started really interacting with more founders in the space, I felt like conventionality doesn't really lead you to anywhere extraordinary. And, we have this extraordinary feat or challenge ahead of us, which is how do you reinvent a food system? You have to get strength from wherever you can get it.
And how did you find this organization in Berlin? So you were in Taiwan, if I'm not mistaken. You were just researching online and you stumbled with this organization in Berlin?
Actually, no. I was very fortunate to have a friend in common, very randomly. So it was another Mexican friend of mine that I met while I was in the US. One Mexican Independence Day in Taipei, we happened to run into each other, which is quite wild now looking back. But yeah, she was living in Taiwan at the time, finished up, and then went to go do a master's in Germany. And through mutual connections, I was able to learn about this organization. Long story short, was able to learn enough about it to apply and then finally join the team in around March of 2019.
And you landed in Berlin, as you mentioned. You had a one-way ticket. After being there several weeks, you ultimately landed a job. How was the experience there? And also, how did that also inspire you into taking that, let's say, moving from having a job at an incubator into you actually becoming an entrepreneur yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a huge learning curve. There was a really big learning curve in the sense that
because you didn't have any business background.
No, not at all.
Or engineering background.
No, no, you had to pick up both of those skill sets kind of on the go. And I mean, I'm still not a technical profile, but I'm fully convinced that when you care about something enough and when you're passionate about something enough, that you're able to learn as much as possible about it. And I think that when I got involved in our industry, which is in 2019, just to give a little bit more context, some of the earliest companies got started around 2014 is kind of when some of the more known companies started taking off, started developing products to bring to market, etc. So our industry is almost around 10 years old.
What are some well-known names from that 2014 vintage they were mentioning?
A few well-known ones are Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, Just, Perfect Day, and formerly Clara Foods, now the Every Company. I think I might have said them in chronological order, 1 through 5. But yeah, all these companies, pioneers in this space, got started around 2014, some a little bit earlier. So our industry is only about 10 years old. It's a super young industry. And in around 2019, I'm biased because that's when I got started. But before that, it was still kind of unknown industry. It wasn't very, very mainstream. So I think that I was very, very fortunate to come in at a time where there was a lot of focus, a lot of attention that was coming onto the space. And 5 years later, half of that lifetime of that industry, I've been fortunate enough to be in that. So very, very grateful for that. Ever since then, we've been focused on this industry and I'm completely in love with the work that we do.
And what motivated you to take that next step of starting your own business?
For me, the question was always, how can I have as much impact as I can, right? And I think when I first got started at the accelerator, we were working with founders from all over the world. And I was just so drawn by these people. They had all sorts of super decorated CVs and backgrounds. But I felt so reflected in them in the sense that they all had the same motivations, right? A lot of them were vegan or ate very little meat and just were very convinced and committed, just very convinced that this was the best way to create large scale change. So it was a lot of following the people that I've kicked on this journey. And I had a lot of respect and admiration for a lot of these founders. So I said, if they on their journey have elected this route, then I think we need to pay attention here, right? And of course, there's always that imposter syndrome that kicks in there in terms of, especially when you don't come from a business background or you don't come from a science background, you're always going to have that little voice in your head about just because you work with entrepreneurs, then you want to go and play entrepreneur yourself. I think now that I've been in this space for a little bit longer, there's always learning opportunities and there's always growth to be had. But I think when you talk about what are some of the fundamental characteristics when investors or angel investors are making their bets on companies, I think that you need to have that relentless conviction from the founding team that you're going to see this through, right? And I feel like that's one thing that you can't teach, right? You can teach go-to-market, you can teach scaling strategies, right? You cannot teach that conviction. I think that a lot of the business books now are trying to educate trying to push people to start with their why, when why was for a long time all that I had, right? All that we had. So it was just a matter of, okay, how do you put together the what? How do you put together the how? And fortunately, there's amazingly talented people in our industry that have played such a fundamental role in what Libre has done up until now, where it is today, that you don't have to go at it alone. So here we are.
And from all of those, because you were exposed to the world of food at, I would say, like you were playing on the big leagues of the food industry at that time. And how exactly did you found that business idea that you ultimately decided to pursue? Was it because you were working on a project specialized on that topic? Was it because of a connection that you built there? How did you, because of course, when we talk about food, there's many different variations, many different paths you could have taken. But what was the thing that ultimately triggered you and say like, yeah, this is the idea that I want to pursue. I'm going to go all in.
Just for a little bit of context, when we talk about alternative proteins, we normally break it down in 3 different pillars. So the first one is plant-based, mainly just how do you recreate animal-based products using plants as the main ingredient. Number 2, you have cultivated solutions, mainly cultivated meat, which is how do you take cells from an animal and how do you grow them in a lab to be able to replicate tissue, flesh, or fats as well. And the last one is fermentation-enabled. Under the fermentation-enabled pillar is both precision fermentation and biomass fermentation. And precision fermentation, basically you take an organism such as a yeast, for example, and then whereas this yeast would conventionally express certain proteins, for example, you re-engineer that yeast so that it produces animal-based protein. So this is precision fermentation has been used for quite a long time now, specifically in the pharmaceutical industry. And now it's being tweaked and adjusted to be able to bring value to the food industry. In our case at Libre, we're working specifically with biomass fermentation. We're working with distinct organisms. Specifically, in our case, we're working with fungi. And what we do is we feed that organism in a way that it begins to grow into a biomass. And then that biomass, we're able to treat it and be able to extract different functionalities, whether we want to use it directly as a meat replacement, right? Using that or taking advantage of the characteristics of the fungi, specifically its root structure or mycelium, to resemble the same fibrosity of meat. There's also applications of being able to extract fat elements, at the same time, a lot of different properties from animal-based foods. It's a real fascinating technology, the way that we grow the fungi. We grow them in infrastructure that's very similar to the beer brewing industry. So we grow them in vessels called bioreactors, which is a very interesting technology where you're able to pretty much grow food 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, irrespective of climate conditions, which for me made the most sense for us to pursue because you're also able to grow it in record time. So what would normally take plants months to grow or plant crops to grow or the years that it would take to fatten a cow, you're able to reproduce this new form of food in just a matter of days and at the most optimal levels, a matter of hours, right? I think for me, what drew me to this technology was my fear for protein sovereignty, right? How are we able to feed a growing global population with ever depleting resources, right? There was a really interesting study that came out in 2022 that was saying that in order for us to feed the growing global population that we're going to have in 2050, we have to produce more food in the next 40 years than we have in the past 8,000. Right. So it's like, how the hell do we do that? So it's this technology is not only very attractive from a technology standpoint, but it offers a real tangible solution to be able to deliver on this massive undertaking that we have in front of us.
And I think some of the previous experiences you have has to do a lot with that large scale mindset, like how do you achieve that greatest impact? So it seems that this technology is the one that could deliver that.
That's what we hope for. That's the framework under which we operate.
So, Alan, of course, we're going to dive deeper into Libre in our next conversation, but I would just like to briefly switch into, you're now running your startup. I'm curious about just understanding, like, how exactly did you ended up switching from Berlin to Spain? Like, what drove you to Spain and Barcelona specifically?
I mean, I think that switch was influenced by a few reasons. I think the first one was at the time I was very, very happy in Berlin. Berlin is such a key city for everything regarding innovation, specifically in food at the moment. And it was very hard for me to leave. But I was very drawn by a lot of the biotech talent that was in Barcelona. It's not specifically directed at food, but there is a big biotech space here. And for me, I also found it very important to tap into a very strong food culture, right? Because at the end of the day, we got started from a very selfless, altruistic motivation in terms of how to start the company. But we understand that the only way for us to turn this into something more than just like a well-intentioned pursuit is to operate as a high functioning business, right? And I think for that, having a standout product is fundamental, right? Being able to have great products is key. Being able to have strong talent is everything. And then being able to execute with your go-to-market, with your distribution, all of that stems out of doing those two first things very well, right? Having a great product and being able to have a sound team. So I think that being drawn to that biotech talent here, as well as that food culture, I think enabled us to really have the best product developers in the region making the best products for the industry. So I think from there, that's how Libre has grown into the company that it is today. And I think that it was the best decision that we could have made at the time. And we're very happy to call Barcelona our home.
And now what I would love to speak about, of course, each and every stage we've been talking about, I think there's a lot to dig deeper on. But now I would love to also connect it with your relationship back to your roots, let's say back to Mexico. Are you currently doing something connected with your business with Mexico? Are you somehow collaborating in some shape or form right now?
Objectively speaking, I think that Latin America has a super crucial role to play in this food transition. There's so much talent in the region, so much ingenuity as well in terms of how to put forward solutions.
And a great food culture, by the way.
100%. So I think that it's just a matter of time before we're able to show our full strength. Just huge hats off to all the founders doing amazing things in the region. Everything with how to reverse climate change, those working in food and other climate solutions as well. The way that I try to support and I try to give back, I've always stayed close to a lot of the entrepreneurship hubs in the region, specifically focused on food. I've worked with a few companies in the food tech sector from there. I've also came into contact with a lot of different universities, specifically their biotech programs, giving a little bit of a glimpse into what we do and opening up the stage a bit in terms of like the huge potential that there is in food. I think that our ties to the region will only be strengthened further in the next few years. I'm hopeful that Libre can continue expanding its reach and its impact, and how we can start really tapping into a lot of that talent in the region, how we can really start concentrating some of that talent and redirecting it to food or focusing it on food is something that I have in our plans for the next few years. So very excited to be able to get us there and being able to help out from afar as much as possible in the meantime.
And Alan, thank you very much for sharing. Just being conscious of time, I would love to get your best advice for other aspiring founders. Again, just hearing at you and the journey that you've had across the world, across different jobs, activities, now as a startup entrepreneur, like what would be your best advice for somebody that wants to, let's say, build a startup with such a potential as the one that you're currently building?
I don't know. I think that I don't want to sound cliche, but I think that we can't underestimate the power of just starting, right? Because I think that when I think back at every extraordinary event that's happened in my life, right? Everything that I would have in my wildest dreams never imagined, I always jumped seemingly too soon, or I always jumped seemingly without really knowing what was going to wait for me there, if there was going to be anything waiting for me there. And I think that that's how you set yourself up for the biggest growth, right? Because if we wait to have everything planned out, if we wait to have everything figured out, we'll never do the things that are needed to be done. And I think that I look back now on the journey, and now I think the growth that I've had as not only as an entrepreneur, but as a person in the past 3 years has been just exponential. I mean, has just been massive, massive, massive. But I think now looking back, it makes me realize just like how little I knew when I got started. And I think that that's okay. as long as you embrace that learning with humility. You stay humble, you ask for help when it's needed. But then when you're a little bit further along the journey, always make sure to then go back and extend your hand, right? To all those people who helped you, give that back, stay humble in your learning, stay pushing. But I think it's always about never underestimating, just starting. And I always say that I might not be the smartest, or I might not be I don't know, whatever it is we want to call it. I think that I'll be here at the end of it all. So it's the one that won't throw in the towel. And I don't know, that's the Latino mindset, if that's a Mexican mindset of not giving up, of not throwing in the towel. But I think that you need that relentless optimism and that relentless drive to do anything significant in entrepreneurship. And that's the goal.
Incredible way of wrapping it up. Alan, thank you very much for your time. It's been a fantastic conversation. Appreciate all of what you shared, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Sergio. My pleasure. Speak soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And thanks to you for joining us today. Please remember to subscribe via your favorite podcast app to be notified about new episodes, and share with us your feedback. We would love to hear from you. Thank you also to the Mexpreneurs team, Valeria Morel, Hector Barragan from Hyper Voltage, Francisco Jaimes, Pamela Elizalde, Katia Cruz, Rocío Marroquín. I am Sergio Chavez. See you next time.